On the subject of MMT, yeah, so it's been such a massive debate. I mean, there was this whole idea, right, about whether government debt matters and whether governments can just spend. So modern monetary theorists say, well, governments can spend as long as there's the real resources available, and the only limit is inflation. And I think over the course of 2021, they kind of won that framing. And when governments were spending loads during the pandemic, right, you had not too many people being concerned about government debt in the same way they were, for example, I don't know, after 2008 when Obama was trying to pass stimulus. So they seem to have won that debate and that framing, at least temporarily, during 2021. But now what you have is you actually have inflation, right? So now people are saying, well, okay, you were right that the constraint is inflation, but look at all this inflation. We've reached it. So maybe the expansionary policy wasn't such a great idea, or maybe, you know, it was partially a great idea, but we've gone too far with it. So it's been a really interesting shift of focus. I mean, I don't know what you think of it, and whether you agree with that MMT view.
Yeah, so for me, MMT has always been a bit difficult because I've never taken the time to properly dive into it. So I saw some people in the chat like saying, "What's MMT?" MMT is modern monetary theory, and it was really like a reaction to sort of the very simplistic view that the government always needs to tax first, basically, to be able to do some spending. Right. And modern monetary theory came in and turned it upside down. And like you said, sort of came very much with this political messaging that you can always spend as a government your own money as long as there isn't inflation. And if you overspend, then you'll see that in inflation, right? But what I thought was interesting is that I also follow some opponents from MMT. So I also follow some Austrian economists on Twitter. And I think I saw someone saying, you know, MMT is like the Austrians on the left, basically, in the sense that they're more sort of about storytelling and less about formal modeling. But this Austrian guy said, like, yeah, MMT was right, but what they're now doing is what I always predicted, is they're not saying now, okay, now we have inflation, now we should stop spending. And I thought that was an interesting critique. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I kind of sympathize with that point of view a little bit, because my interpretation of MMT, and I'm probably a bit like you in the sense that I wouldn't regard myself as an expert on MMT. You know, I engage with MMT quite regularly, but mostly in the form of kind of blog posts, papers. I haven't read, for example, The Deficit Myth. I haven't read, for example, the macroeconomics textbook done by some MMTers. So I haven't delved into it in that much depth, but still probably, you know, enough, I think, that I should have, if they're any good at communicating MMTs, I should probably have a decent idea. And my interpretation was, well, let's spend until we get inflation. And then once we get inflation, we tax, right? Mm-hmm. Or perhaps some other non-interest rate measures. Some MMTs have talked about, you know, regulation and things like that. But now what we're getting is we've spent until we've got inflation, but nobody's advocating tax. And then I saw, you know, Stephanie Kelton said, oh, well, we actually didn't say that we should tax when inflation is high. And you get, you know,
that's actually, not true, right?
For the record, was that, sorry?
That's not true, right? That's very strange.
Yeah. No, they definitely said that. Like that was the whole thing. Inflation, like you control inflation with taxes. And I always thought, by the way, I didn't think that was a very good policy, because I don't think taxes are a good tool for controlling inflation. I feel like a lot of taxes would actually tend to increase prices. But anyway, you know, regardless of what you think, that it seems like there's a bit of an inconsistency here. And yeah, it gives me some sympathy with, you know, the kind of monetarist or Austrian or Chicago types who kind of said, well, we warned you about inflation and now it's happening and you don't care. You know?
Yeah. And, you know, it reminds me a little bit of sort of the Keynesians, in the sense that, and this is because before the stream started, someone was already in the chat and was saying like, hey, you know, if this inflation proves Keynesians were wrong. And I think that's actually the opposite, in the sense that the Keynesian theory is like stimulate, or at least the new Keynesian, stimulate through interest rates until you get inflation. And then what happens? Hike interest rates. And I think MMT is very comparable to that, but they just say, no, don't look at interest rates, look at taxes or government spending in general, right? So it's like, if there's not enough inflation, MMTers say spend more, and new Keynesians say lower the interest rates or do a lot of quantitative easing. And then if there is inflation, which there is now, Keynesian theory would say, okay, now is the time to hike rates, stop quantitative easing. And MMT would say, I suppose, raise taxes.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess new Keynesians, that has been the policy, right? To when the economy is running hot, as people say, you just increase interest rates and then, you somehow lower demand. And it seems that MMT, it doesn't seem to have a coherent response to inflation. And I think one of the things as well is that even if it does in theory, it's not institutionalized. And I think now it's not clear exactly what we want to do. And MMTs are saying don't raise interest rates.